Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here at this webinar. My name is Linda Lee. I'm your host for this webinar, and I am a medical student at Duke University School of Medicine, interested in psychiatry, as well as the Youth Ambassador Leader for UCA WAVES, or United Chinese Americans WAVES. And UCA WAVES is a youth mental health collaborative that seeks to destigmatize mental health and provide psychoeducation to Asian American families to help fight against the stigma against mental health. And so I'm really glad that you're all here. One of the ways that we provide the psychoeducation is through webinars like this. And so today we are going to be hearing from Sith Riantawan and Patricia Riantawan as well on the social and emotional lives of children and adolescents. So they'll shortly be on, but to introduce them, so Sith Riantawan is a child and adolescent psychiatry fellow at LAC and USC County Hospital. And Patricia is a second-year residency fellow at Loma Linda University Psychiatry Residency Program. And so Sith split his upbringing between California and Bangkok, Thailand. He completed his undergraduate degree at Biola University, and then both his medical degree and general psychiatry residency at Loma Linda University. He is currently completing a child and adolescent psychiatry fellowship at LAC and USC in California. He has a particular interest in school-based mental health, destigmatizing mental health conditions, and equipping communities and religious organizations with tools to better understand psychiatric illnesses. Patty was born and raised in Vancouver, Canada, did her undergraduate degree at Duke University in North Carolina, and completed her medical degree at Wayne State University in Michigan. During medical school, she developed a deep passion for working with underserved communities both locally and globally, and she became involved with Street Medicine Detroit and other global healthcare initiatives. Her interests within psychiatry include cultural psychiatry and promoting mental health education and prevention in school-aged children. She's currently completing her adult residency at Loma Linda University and hopes to continue her training by pursuing a child and adolescent fellowship in the future. We also will have Dr. Sen Shu as our chat moderator. He is a staff psychiatrist at Brigham and Women's in Boston. So we're very pleased to have all of our lecturers and psychiatrists here today to talk a little bit about psychodevelopment stages for children and adolescents. So I will let Patty and Sith take it away.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. We're just going to share our screen real quick so that we could have our slides posted.
Give us one moment.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much again, Linda, for the introduction. I'm Patty.
And I'm Sith Riantawan.
And we're extremely honored to be invited to speak with the WAVES community today. We're extremely passionate about Asian American mental health and spreading knowledge within our communities. So it's a really big, enormous blessing to be able to speak with you all today.
Yeah, like Linda was saying, I'm a psychiatrist that just finished their adult psychiatry at Loma Linda, and now I'm doing a fellowship focusing on children and adolescents in Los Angeles.
And I'm currently a second-year psychiatry resident at Loma Linda, and I also have a passion for child and adolescent psychiatry, so hopefully pursuing that route in the future. We just wanted to provide a really quick disclaimer right before we start. So we personally do not have the privilege of being parents. So as of now, we don't have any personal experience raising children. However, our goal today is we're hoping to share with you all what we have personally experienced in our medical practice, what well-known theorists have also shared in their experiences in the past, and what science has shown as well.
Yeah, so today we're going to talk about the social and emotional lives of children. But another preface is that a lot of this information will be a lot of factual knowledge, but our hope is that we'll be able to give some general principles to help with life and family upbringing. But something important also is that maybe some practical tips will come out of this. But for the most part, it'll be general principles, because everyone's lives are so different and it's very case by case. So some of the objectives are, we'll be talking about the 5 major stages within what we call the Ericksonian stages of development. Next, we're going to be recognizing how children and adolescents learn, feel, and think in each one of these stages. And then last, kind of explore some methods and techniques of parenting within each one of these stages. So I mentioned an individual by the name of Erik Erikson. Now, there have been many individuals who have theorized different models of human development, some psychologists, psychiatrists, psychoanalysts, such as Sigmund Freud and Piaget and his cognitive development as well. But we really wanted to focus specifically on Dr. Erik Erikson's developmental models. And he was a German-American psychologist and psychoanalyst. And this is a really simple way of depicting all these stages. He has 8 different stages from birth all the way to death. And he talks quite a bit about how humans interact with each other, the world, and themselves. And so within each stage, we're going to boil it down to within each stage is going to be a main question or task being asked of the child during that time, or the individual during that time. And within these stages, the individual can answer the questions or task in a healthy, positive way, or in a negative, unhealthy way, right? So there are 2 main outcomes to this. And another thing that is important to know is that once they finish answering this stage that they're in, they go on to the next stage. So it's generally sequential. 2 important things to remember is that at times, most of the time, the way that you answer the question in each one of these stages will carry with you throughout your life. And the other thing is that some individuals are stuck in certain stages without being able to go on to the next one. All right, so a quick overview of the 5 stages that we're going to talk about. We're not going to talk about all 8, but just focus on 5: infants, toddlers, preschool, school age, and adolescent. And in each one of these stages, we're going to be talking about the main question being asked of them, or the main task, what they're thinking, feeling, and learning during this time, and really general methods of parenting during these stages. And last, the 2 main ways a child and adolescent answers the main question.
All right, so we're going to start the very first stage, which is the infant stage, and that falls into the range of 0 to 18 months. So let's first take a look at what is the main question being asked during this stage. The main question being asked by the infant is, can I trust the world? And so why are they asking this question during this period? Well, to answer that, we'll take a closer look at what are some of the tasks that they're learning and that they're completing during this period. So specifically, what are they learning, feeling, and thinking? Some basic tasks that they're doing during this period is they're learning how to feed, they're sleeping, they're touching, they're grasping things, they're getting to know the world around them. As an infant, you're frequently pretty helpless and very dependent on your caregiver and very uncertain of the world as well. And so without the help of their parents or their caregivers, they may not be able to survive in the world. And what are important things that we want to remember as parents? For parents, one really important thing during this stage is being able to provide these basic needs that they require. And that includes providing food, clothing, housing. But just providing a lot of these physical needs isn't sufficient. Parents also need to be consistent, reliable, responsive to their infants' needs and requirements, and also affectionate towards their needs as well. And so when we look back at the initial question that's being asked by the infant, the main question is, can I trust the world? The way that they can answer this question is twofold. If parents are able to be consistent, be reliable, be affectionate, and be able to respond to the needs of their infant, the infant will recognize that, hey, I can trust the world. They'll develop a skill called basic trust. And when they feel like they can trust the world, they will also feel like I am okay, and might even lead to more feelings of hope, knowing that if a new crisis arrives, other people give a form of support. Unfortunately, if a parent is not able to properly provide for these basic needs, whether that's due to substance use, their own mental health issues, being too busy at work, infants may develop something called basic mistrust. And what that means is, no, I cannot trust the people around me. I cannot trust the world. I am not okay. And maybe even feeling I am bad. And we're going to take a brief moment to describe something that's really important during this infant period. And that's the concept of attachment theory. And why this is an important concept to understand is because attachment is something that develops during this infant period of 0 to 18 months. And this theory is a psychological model that describes how strong physical and emotional connections to at least one primary caregiver is really important to child development. And to better help us understand the significance of attachment, we're just going to go briefly through some of the main theorists who talked and really helped develop this concept. So the first one, his name is John Bowlby. He was a British psychiatrist and psychoanalyst who had an interest in child development and coined the term attachment behavior. He described that a child has an innate need to attach to one main figure, and that's usually the mother in this case. He believed that mother and child attachment was a crucial medium of human interaction, and that attachment greatly influences later development, their personality, and even potentially the risks of developing mental illness down the road. Another individual, his name is Harry Harlow. He is an American psychologist who studied the effects of maternal deprivation and social isolation. So one of the main studies that he experimented on is actually with rhesus monkeys, in which infants were separated from their mothers at birth. And what he observed during this period is that the infant monkeys who were separated from their mothers were actually demonstrating disturbing behaviors, including blank stares or circling in their cages. And what he found is that this experiment demonstrated the importance of maternal-child bonding, and that even though physical needs are met, that may not be sufficient, and that the emotional needs of love and affection are extremely key. The final individual that they'll discuss, her name is Mary Ainsworth. She was an American-Canadian developmental psychologist who created an observational way to actually see the differences that infants attach to their caregivers. And she created a procedure called the strange situation experiment, which we'll talk about over here. So this was developed by Mary Ainsworth back in the 1970s. And in this experiment, infants were placed into a room with toys, with furniture, sometimes with their parents here, sometimes with them gone, sometimes with a stranger present, sometimes with the stranger gone. And what her goal was to observe how they reacted to their parents coming in and out, and how ultimately that determined the type of attachment that they had with their parent. And what she discovered is that there's normally one of 4 major attachment styles in all infants. The first one is secure attachment. In secure attachment, an infant will utilize the parents as a secure and dependable base. They'll feel like there's room to explore their environment, but also they constantly do have contact with their parent. Infants with this type of attachment style tend to have caregivers who are more sensitive to the child's needs and who are very, very dependable. The second type of attachment she observed is something that we call insecure avoidant. In this type of attachment style, infants show no distress on separation, and they might actually even show avoiding the parent when they return or having limited contact, feeling like, hey, I don't want you, or I don't need to show that I need you at all. And infants that fall into this category might have caregivers who tend to dislike physical contact, or they demonstrate very low emotional expressiveness when the infant wants to interact. A third type of attachment is called insecure, ambivalent, or even resistant. Infants of this category might show some wariness to a stranger. They might be very highly distressed when they're separated from their parents, but when the parents return, they might even be very passive or very ambivalent. Typically, these infants have caregivers who demonstrate a lot of inconsistencies when responding to a child's needs, sometimes showing them care, sometimes distancing themselves. And finally, the fourth type is disorganized attachment. Infants of this category might react to parents in a very disoriented, almost incoherent manner, or a manner that doesn't really make sense. Like they're clinging onto their parents, but also crying and leaning away, not looking at them, almost as if they are very distressed. Infants of this category tend to have caregivers who are a source of fear and fright. That might be because they were abusive in the past, they've been threatening or very dissociated. So our understanding of just how infants form attachments to their caregivers can really be a boundary and a base for us understanding development moving forward.
Absolutely. All right, so that is the infant stage. Now we're going to go on to the toddler stage, between 18 months to 2 or 3 years. So again, each stage has a main question. And what's the main question here? It's, can I do it myself? And what are they thinking, feeling, learning? They are learning sentences. They're learning to dress themselves a little bit more, starting to potty train, maybe just a little bit. But something really important is that they're often saying no or mine, right? Throwing temper tantrums, which is really common, the idea of terrible twos, things like that. But the question is why? Why are they or tantrums and saying these things? Of course, there's many reasons, but one is, if we think back on the infant stage, you can see that they are completely dependent. They're powerless. They have barely any controls of their faculties. And now they're learning to master it a bit more. And so this desire of autonomy and independence is slowly kind of emerging. And so how can we use this to understand parenting a bit more? It's important to foster this independence, to give them options to choose from, of course, within the bounds of what's reasonable, to encourage them to explore as well. And most kids are fearful of the unknown. Most humans are, right? But this starts when we're really young. And so the job of a parent, in a way, is to lower the fear of the unknown by building in routines in the home, in daily life, reassure them about many things, answer their questions that they have and that they usually ask repeatedly over and over again. Another thing is the way that we provide feedback and instruction needs to be warm and constructive. It's important to remember the way that you speak to your child influences how the child grows up and talks to him or herself. The next is the way that we set limits and boundaries. Yes, we want them to explore, to understand the world, for them to understand themselves. But at the same time, we need to set fair and consistent boundaries. Now, I want to emphasize that the two aspects, fair and consistent boundaries. Fair in that, yes, this depends on culture and community, religious values, right? But maybe one way to understand whether the limits that you're setting on your child is fair is by asking trusted families, friends, your community. Is this boundary that I'm setting reasonable, right? The idea that it takes a village to raise a child. And then next, these boundaries need to be consistent. Once you see that, yes, this boundary is fair, be consistent with that. Set clear expectations so the child understands, unfortunately, these are the consequences if you go past these boundaries. The issue is that inconsistent boundaries cause confusion in the family and in the child, and at times they can go one way and disregard the boundary altogether, or they might be locked in anxiety and fear because they have no idea where the boundaries may be, right? It's this fear of the unknown as well. All right, so the main question, again, that is being answered is, can I do it myself? And so how are they answering these questions? Healthy parenting that leads to a child to have a sense of dependence and exploration. They can say to myself, I can do it myself. Not bad. I am not weak. I am a person. Now, unfortunately, if parents disregard all the questioning they have about the world, give them choices, or just tells them about the dangers of the world, they might feel powerless. They might have a lot of doubt and shame. And so maybe they say, oh no, I can't do anything. I'm not capable. I'm weak, or I'm bad.
All right, so we're going to move on to the third stage, from toddler stage to now preschool. And in this preschool stage, it'll fall under kids around the age of 2 to 3 years old to 6 years old. So let's take a look now at this stage. What is the main question that is being asked by the preschoolers? Their main question during this stage is it okay for me to move? Is it okay for me to act? And what are some things that they're learning, feeling, and thinking during this period? So during this period, when they're just about to start school, they're learning to play with other kids. They're interacting with people. They're counting, they're naming, they're imitating their parents. They might be telling stories and connecting words as well. And what that means is that they're asking a lot of questions, and they're sparking their curiosity, and they want to explore the world around them. But at the same time, they're also worried and fearful of the unknown. During this period, there's something called object constancy that they're also learning. And what object constancy means is that they understand and know that something can be out of your sight, but it can still exist. So for example, if mom and dad drop me off at school and they disappear, they still exist, they still love me, and they'll come back and pick me up later on. During this period, they develop something called the critical voice. And what the critical voice is, it's a part of a person's mind that is critical and more analytical of oneself. So for example, a person might say to themselves, you keep making the same mistake, you're so dumb, you're so bad. All of us have something called a critical voice inside of us. Some of them are more harmful than others. And so this voice helps us develop during this stage. How does it do that? Typically, the voice develops because of the fact that of the way that parents will tend to criticize the child. And so, part of understanding this period as well is recognizing that kids are learning to understand the minds of themselves and also of other people. Children are beginning to recognize that they have a lot of emotions, they have a lot of thoughts, and they're also recognizing that their feelings and emotions could be different from other people's. And why this is really important is because if children are not able to learn this well, they may grow up without properly understanding other people's perspectives, potentially lead to poor relationships. And this brings us into a really important concept that we'll discuss that children tend to learn in this period, and that's the concept of theory of mind. And this theory of mind is the ability to understand and infer the mental state. So that includes like thoughts, desires, intentions, emotions of others, and to understand that they could be different from your own. And we're going to display this concept of theory of mind with a famous example that's called the Sally Ann situation. So we'll take a look at the image on the right. It's Sally and Ann, and we'll go through each of the steps. So in this picture, the very first step is that Sally has a basket and Anne has a box. Step number 2, Sally puts a red ball into her basket. Step number 3, she walks away and leaves Anne alone. Step 4, Anne takes the ball out of the basket and puts it into her box. Step number 5, Sally returns and wants to play with the red ball. The next question is, where will Sally look for the ball? So let's just take a few seconds right now, just in our own heads. You guys don't need to share this out loud. Where do you think Sally would look for the ball, given the information we provided here? So as you're thinking about this and pondering over it, for most of us, hopefully, we recognize that Sally will most likely look for the ball in her basket. And why? Because we recognize that from Sally's point of view, she last left the ball in her basket. And so for her, that's what she knows, and that's the information she understands. And so even us being able to think about that information means that we're able to see things from Sally's point of view and also know that our thoughts and feelings might be different from other people. However, for a lot of children who have not yet developed this concept of theory of mind, what occurs is that they might look at this picture and be like, no, Sally would of course look for the ball in the box because that's where the ball is. The ball is currently in the box. And so Sally will look for it in the box. And so that, that type of thinking, once again, why is it important is because, children being able to develop the concept of other people having different thoughts and different perceptions is really important for developing healthy relationships and social interactions. If they're unable to reasonably predict or understand another person's perspectives or feelings, they might react to situations with confusion, fear, anger, resentment, have difficulty understanding the world around them. So kind of coming back now to stage 3 of preschoolers and maybe what parents can do during this period. A lot of the roles here are very similar to the toddler rules or the toddlers and what they were experiencing during that period. For example, one big thing here is building a sense of independence. So once again, parents are giving them options to choose from, encouraging them to explore. Exploration, being creative, parents giving them the ability to come up with their own stories, being creative with ideas. Children during this period will love telling stories regardless of believability or how realistic it is. And during this period, it's really important for them to provide warm, constructive feedback and instruction, but once again, still setting limits and boundaries, making sure that they are consistent and firm, similar to Sith had talked before. So what is the main question, once again, that they're answering? How do they better? So the main question is, how can I move and how can I act? And so if parents are able to encourage a sense of exploration, indicating that it's okay to explore, it's okay to make mistakes, then a child's answer may be, hey, I can lead, I can make decisions, I can take initiative. And they will feel a sense of confidence. Whereas if a child is frequently scolded, controlled, parents constantly punishing the child for initiating, they might start feeling a sense of embarrassment or develop feelings of insecurity, saying that, hey, I'm not able to make my own decisions, and maybe I'm even a nuisance.
All right. So that was the preschool age. Now we're going to move on to school age. This is elementary, middle school, around 6 to 12 years old. What is the main question being asked and the main task? It's, am I competent enough? All right, and why? What are they learning, feeling, thinking during this stage? There's a lot of school going on, right? So they're learning math, history, science, participating in a lot of sports. They're developing their cognitive skills even more, right, with games and problem solving. And with this, they are beginning to compare themselves even more with their peers. They're learning to interact with peers and with society and see how they rank along this kind of social scale. And in that way, they're building a profile of themselves, the areas that they're good in, the areas that they're weak in. And so with this profile, they're learning, wow, I'm an individual who is entering into this society, into this community. So there's this wide perspective that they have, not just themselves, not just their family, but even more joining this aspect. All right. Now, what are parenting techniques, guidelines that we can think of? Well, of course, with school and with extracurricular, we encourage parents to participate in this with parents teaching them certain subjects and skills after school. But also one critical part is to remember not to equate their performance with how much you accept, love, value them. All right, whether they get an A or an F, whether they don't win a specific trophy, anything like that, that your affection and that your value for them is still consistent. Next is, since they are entering a stage where they're comparing themselves a lot more, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? It helps us understand ourselves more. It's important to develop in them a mindset of continued growth, and understanding that, hey, some people will always be better in some aspects than me, and that's okay. This doesn't mean that I'm a less of a human, right? And so encouraging for them to work on areas they're weak in, to see areas of gradual improvement, and to praise them for those particular efforts. All right, so how do they answer the main question? And the main question again being, am I competent enough? So children who are able to do well enough in school and activities, I want to pay special emphasis on doing well enough, not even doing the top, right? So when children who are able to do well enough in school and activities and have good friends, they develop a deep sense of competence, become proud of their abilities, and then they begin to say to themselves, wow, I'm capable of making it in this society. Even more, I'm worthwhile. But when children struggle so much in school without the help of their parents, when they feel like they're constant disappointment to their parents or those around them, or that they are belittled those who are around them, they'll develop this sense of inferiority. And with this sense of inferiority, they might say to themselves, wow, I can't make it. I can't make it in this society. Worthless.
So this next stage, and it'll be the final stage that we're talking about, moving from school age now to adolescent population, which is, I'm sure for many of us, we know this stage very well. It ranges between around 13 to, in the past, around like 18 years of age, but recent theories have also can go anywhere up to like 23, 24 years of age. And if we take a look at the question being asked right now, so who am I and who can I be? That's one of the major questions focusing on identity that our teenagers tend to, really struggle with and think about. And if we take a look at what are they learning, feeling, and thinking during this period, there are many, many things. So one of the first things is their academic. During this period, school becomes maybe more rigorous. They're planning for their careers, they're planning for college, they're thinking about what they want to do with their lives. So part of that is developing their identity as well. They might, be experimenting with what type of social group and what type of environment do they belong to or want to be a part of. You find them experimenting with their clothes, how they're speaking, what they're listening to, the music that they're listening to, activities they want to do, sports that they want to be involved in. And all of that comes to form their identity. One of the other really key things is body image. And during this period, a lot of the adolescent body is changing. For a lot of female girls, they will be having breast development. They might be starting their periods. For teenage boys, a lot of times they might be experiencing erections. For both, they might be developing facial features like acne. And so not only are a lot of these changes, whether emotionally or physically, can be a source of adjustment and anxiety, but once again, these are areas where teens can start using this to compare themselves with their peers and even their own sense of worth. And it can be a very uncomfortable and awkward period for them. Another thing that we see teenagers experience is that they might be de-idealizing their parents. So if we take a look back to when they were in their infant stage, toddlers, school age period, children saw their parents as strong, capable, almost perfect individuals. When they went into their adolescent years, they might see more clearly that their parents are imperfect, that they're humans, that they make mistakes too. And because of this realization, they start to feel like maybe they can't completely trust their parents. that the parents do not fully or completely understand them compared to when they were young. That is normal. That's definitely a normal way for a lot of teenagers to feel. This might lead them to feel a sense of loneliness or having more conflicts with their parents. And if they're moving a little bit further away from their parents, they start finding relationships and unity in other areas. And that is where their peers come in. A lot of teenagers, which many of you probably have experienced, want to be around their friends, their peers a lot more than their parents. And why does that happen? Part of that is because, once again, their views of their parents are changing. Maybe they're recognizing that their parents aren't perfect, and they want to find other people now that they can relate to and who can understand them. And once again, this is completely normal at this period for teenagers to trust their friends more than their parents. And another aspect that they start growing in is understanding attraction and sexual drive. This becomes a stage where they begin to feel maybe attracted to other people, having crushes in school. And concepts like sex, masturbation, pornography are all aspects of the stage that most will probably experience, whether we or parents feel comfortable with it or like it or not. This becomes even more true in kind of the society right now, many of us in America, because we live in a Western society that is saturated with a lot of more hypersexual songs or messages and media.
And so the adolescent stage, some have called it a big paradox, a paradoxical stage. And there are multiple reasons for this. And if we think about the adolescent, they are no longer children, but they're also not fully adults yet, right? They partake in the challenges, privileges, expectations of both phases, and this can be really confusing. For example, physically, they reach physical and sexual maturity well before they are fully cognitively and emotionally mature, right? Another thing is, in some states, you can fly a plane at 14 or 16 or start to do so, but not legally drive. At 17, you can serve in the army, but at the same time, not vote until you're 18, and then you can't drink or smoke when you're 21. You also have a lot of industries pouring billions of dollars advertising, catering to these adolescents, but at the same time, they have restrictions on their employment. And so you can see that they're being pulled in many different ways, even more than how they're developing physically and sexually, right? And so it's very normal for teens to behave inconsistently and at times unpredictably. They are at other times they're fighting their impulses and then accepting them. At times they completely love and adore their parents, but at other times they may feel like they hate them, will rebel against their parents, but also be dependent on them. And also with this idea of identity, they're trying to search for their identity, but at the same time they want to imitate or identify completely with their parents, right? And as I'm saying this, it sounds confusing, right? But it's important to remember how much more confusing is it for the adolescent. So with all that, let's see kind of some parenting methods here. It's important for parents to help foster this really healthy sense of a body image. Of course, taking in your cultural and religious background in mind, it's generally emphasizing health is more important than looks, and definitely not equating that with one's worth. And also action, teaching teens about love, about commitment, about relationships, and how to treat other people. Even more than this, words only go so far. Most of it comes with action. Actions are the proof of what you're saying, and so how you yourself portray the way that you have affection towards loved ones is also really important. And then with the issue of sex, masturbation, pornography, this is of course a touchy subject that definitely depends on your community and religious setting, but teaching them maybe about safe sex practices or how to explore different aspects and viewing their sexuality in a very healthy manner. And the last one is this aspect of identity, helping them explore their identity. This requires a lot of trial and error, but it requires so much communication. Communication between you and the teen requires a lot of trust and willingness to explore different venues of this. And the teen needs to know that you respect them to some degree, okay? So how do they answer the main question? The main question being, who am I? Who can I be? Now, teens who go through this stage in a healthy way, they begin to have this clear understanding of their identity, right? And they can become adults who are successful emotionally, physically, spiritually. Now, unfortunately, teens who go through this stage in an unhealthy way start to be confused about their identity. They are confused about their values, desires, priorities. And so with this, they become adults who feels lost and really lonely. And then with this, they feel a desperate need to fill this loneliness or this feeling of lost with anything that comes to that they can find. And a lot of times this is unfortunately damaging.
All right, so we know that all of the information provided above, we can really see how overwhelming all of this information can be. Or parents, there might be a lot of questions that you guys are thinking about that we hope we can help answer a little bit. One of the things that we know parents think is, oh, do I need to strictly follow this? Is this the only model I should follow? And we want to reassure you all that this is not like a black or white model. This is not law that all children and families have to follow. Once again, this is one theory developed by one individual who created for child development. And even though it is a pretty good overarching model of just things to expect during each stage, every child will be different. They might develop skills at different ages, and because they did not complete a task does not mean that they will not develop skills in the future, later stage, or not be successful later on. And so just recognizing that there are changes and adjustments made just based off of the child themselves. Other questions that we sometimes get from parents is, how do I help my child accomplish a task within their age group? And part of this comes back to really being open with communication and choosing to understand them and recognize that a child at a certain age, their goals or what they're trying to learn and understand is different for each stage and will be different than our own as adults and parents. We might have certain expectations for them, but recognizing and choosing to understand what they are able to already part of helping them accomplish what they can at that certain age group. And so I think understanding and communication is a really big part of it. Another question we get is, what if they never fully developed a task previously within a certain age or maybe within a certain period of time? Part of this, once again, is trying to identify maybe where the lapse occurred. For some kids, it might mean that there was some sort of traumatic experience or some sort of stressor during a period of time that prevented them from being able to accomplish a specific goal or learn certain tasks. And then if that is able to be identified, then okay, how to continue developing in the right direction from that point. But once again, to identify and understand kind of like the inner workings and maybe what influenced in their history. And so as we slowly come to a close, just some general concepts we kind of wanted to share with you all as some closing thoughts. One of the important things is, the world of child is so different from the world of adults and the world of, people who are no longer children, of course. One of the important things is kids are not little adults. I think a lot of times society frequently places certain pressures on children to grow up very quickly or even act like adults. And that's sometimes viewed as a very positive thing. However, I think the important thing, once again, to remember is that kids perceive the world very differently. Understanding of the world and what they are capable of understanding is also very different because their brains and their frontal lobes area that helps controls our thoughts are not yet fully formed. And there is a parenting book written by an Austrian psychiatrist, actually Children, the Challenge. And it mentions and talks on the first few pages this concept about maturity. And we kind of want to touch on this point a little bit because we hear this word used a lot in our community, and it's viewed as a very positive thing, or has a very positive connotation. And what the book says that we frequently use the phrase lack of maturity towards young parents or young kids. Maturity is often deemed to mean unchildlike. And the connotation almost comes in where being childlike is somewhat of an inferior state instead of, just a state that they're naturally in. But if we actually look at the term mature and what that means, it means full growth, full development, the realization of one's potential. And wow, that's a really big statement, which takes a lifetime to achieve. And maybe many adults, it's very difficult to achieve as well. And so, if we think about it, then why does our society place these standards on children and adolescents? Why start saying to them hey, you need to be mature? So I think part of this, of course, there is a balance of, being patient with them, understanding that maturity is something that comes with time, and that sometimes them being a kid is exactly the stage that they need to be in at this period.
And the last thing that we want to say, kind of end on maybe a more hopeful note. We gave you all a lot of information, right? And you might be saying, I can't remember all this. I am so busy. I have to take care of my kids, my grandkids, but I also have to work as well. You might be saying, you're telling me, general principles, but no specific advice. And so how am I actually supposed to help my child at each particular situation? This is impossible. I'm only human, right? And yes, you are only human. You are not a superhero. Parents are not superheroes. And so there's really important concepts of the good mother, but we want to talk about something called a good enough parent. And this concept is from Donald Winnicott, English pediatrician and psychoanalyst. And it does not mean being perfect. A good enough parent is someone who's able to provide an environment that is supportive, nurturing, but who allows their child to experience frustration, disappointment, and pain, because this is all a necessary part of healthy development. Something even more is that a perfect parent is not only impossible, but it's also damaging, because parents need to be, yes, responsive to their child's needs, but they also will inevitably disappoint their child at times. And so because we're all imperfect, and so it's important to kind of accept those flaws in us and to try to gradually improve. And with this kind of balance of the good enough parent, the child develop a sense of resilience, self-reliance, this need of self-agency. So the aim of parenting should not be being perfect, should not be shielding them from any pain, but to provide a good enough environment that allows a child to grow and experience the pain of life, but also the joys of life. Some final thoughts. Let's strive to understand these children through their lens of their developmental stage. Let's remember that parents are only human, not superheroes. And so let us strive to be good enough parents. So thank you for all of your time.
Yeah, thank you so much. And we'll be open to questions. I know there have been some questions coming in from the chat, so we'll take a look at that, and we'll do our best to answer as many as we can.
One that I see here is about separation anxiety. Go ahead, Linda. Were you going to talk?
So, Patty and Sis, would you like to stop sharing the screen?
Oh, yes.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah, so thank you guys so much for offering this just amazing material on just talking through all the different stages of development. And I think it is really important, again, to emphasize what you guys had mentioned about just the good enough parent, because I think sometimes we can just be so flooded with information from different sources, and it's like, what I do I how to have this conversation with my kid. Like, well, am I doing enough? I think that's a concern that a lot of parents perhaps may have, is like, am I doing enough? Is there something else that I could be doing? And sort of, offering them that reassurance that, like, I think that, the fact that you're caring enough to even think about doing these extra things is already an indication you're probably doing better than
Absolutely.
probably better doing than most. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, so one of the things that have come up from the chat, basically, like, Lily had asked a question that goes back to talking about an adverse experience perhaps she had with her mom mentioning to her, like, if they're approaching a police vehicle, like the mom might tell the child, like, oh, don't do anything bad, because these people are going to get you if you do. And I think sometimes this question touches a little bit on the concept of intergenerational trauma, and I'm wondering if you guys can maybe talk a little bit about sort of how the experiences that we have growing up might in part be a lot influenced by our parents, and how their experiences were, like, with dealing with adversity or dealing with certain law enforcement, etc.
Absolutely, yeah. A lot of times these things are inherited through experiences of families from generation to generation, and this is something that's well documented. I think that well, what's important is something to help decrease our anxiety or to work on intergenerational trauma is education, helping us understand kind of the state of things right now, being exposed to different aspects of society a lot more, to be able to widen our understanding, the understanding that maybe our parents unfortunately didn't have, and that's okay, they were working within that system, but to learn more and be exposed more to widen our worldview, and that takes time. And I think with that knowledge comes more insight, and then better ways to adjust and to decrease that anxiety, let's say around police officers or anything like that. Yeah, anything else?
Yeah, I guess to add on to that is, like, once again, for like a really open communication, I think for parents, it's like being honest with, hey, this is why I maybe the way that I perceive situations different, but this is the environment that I came from. This is why that maybe I have been ingrained with some of these thoughts or some of these opinions or experiences that I've had. And so I think with really open communication, being honest about what your experiences was in the past might be able to help your child better understand, once they're old enough to understand, of course, why you react in certain ways. And that doesn't mean that the child has to react in similar ways in the future, but just understanding that the environments that you grew up in is very different, and that influences how you may choose to react to situations in the future. So I think it's like the education is key, and then having like open communication with how past experiences have influenced current thoughts, and hopefully having those discussions will be able to just allow for more understanding.
Mm. No, absolutely. Yeah. I think that the modeling is so important when it comes to having, just helping the child also develop their own sense of self, and being able to develop from an emotional standpoint, is just the parent frequently offering reinforcement and sort of showing the kids, like, what, like, times where they feel upset, like, rather than having the parent, like, freak out and ask, like, why are you upset? Like, like, there's no reason to cry. Like, just being able to sit with that emotion and be more comforting, and feel like they're offering more of a supportive base. And so having the child being aware of their own emotions, and then how they're projecting that to their child can be really important.
Yeah, absolutely.
So on a kind of similar note, one of the things that I think Sharon had mentioned, or one of the members in this chat had mentioned, was just the idea of like, a lot of kids who are growing up, especially when they're younger, there could be a tendency for them to want to perhaps cling to their parents a lot, especially in unfamiliar situations, social situations where they go to parties and they just don't feel comfortable. and they want to go back, or like kids who deal a lot, like we see a lot of kids who deal with absenteeism at school. What are there some things that you guys would recommend in terms of like what the initial steps are in dealing with separation anxiety, and how would you coach the parents through that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think one of the first things is like separation anxiety, or fear or cling to parents when they get into new foreign environments. That's very normal and very typical. And you see that a lot. And it doesn't mean that your child is abnormal in any way. And of course, once again, kids will all, some kids are very comfortable in public settings, whereas some might be more fearful. And so these are normal. And I think part of it will, really trying to figure out, and it sounds like I saw the question earlier, it seems like the family trying to figure out what exactly is triggering the child. I think that is something to really initially start thinking, okay, is it because they are first in a foreign environment? Or are they normally okay in a foreign environment with not that many people? Because there's crowds, it's like noises are very loud. Like what exactly makes it so that it's a scary thing? Sometimes just being in public where there's a lot of faces that they don't know can be scary. And so, parents we've seen to beforehand, things that they have done is, slowly integrating them into communities, and maybe initially starting with smaller groups of people they don't know, whether that's just their friends, bringing them over to a friend's home, having them interact with them. And the more they interact with them, the more they're going to recognize these strangers' faces, and they will no longer be a stranger moving forward. But, something like developing that comfort with foreign people might take time, but maybe inching it. So creating small environments, and then later on bring them into larger public environments, and really giving them that step-by-step exposure could be something that is helpful. Some other things when it comes to separation anxiety, sometimes that's just an age thing as well. You can try to expose them as much as you can when they're younger, but a lot of times kids might act a certain way because it is that period of time in which they will want to cling to their parents more. But when they get into the stages in which they're going to school more, then majority of a lot of their daytime is going to be spent with peers, and you even recognize that their fear in unfamiliar places may lessen as they get more comfortable being around peers and being around people who are not their parents. So that will be a gradual thing that they will develop as they go on in school as well.
Yeah, I think to add on with that, let's say if it's in only one setting, it's a pretty isolated. That's not too much to worry about. But if it's like spread out to every single situation, maybe that's something to think about even, right? And then another thing is, let's look at the developmental stage. What's the question that they're asking themselves? Am I competent enough? How do I compare with my peers? Things like that. And so they might be struggling with that. And so communicating that with them and reassuring them, and this will take time, right? Just reminding them over and over and over again about who they are and things that they could do, things like that.
Mm. So I guess something that parents might wonder too is, on that note, is like what, kind of thinking about like, how do we conceptualize what is considered normal versus what is considered abnormal? And at what point would you say like the parent should consider maybe seeking an additional like professional consultation, or asking a doctor like, is this behavior appropriate? Should I be more worried? Like, any sense of like what point that might the parents might want to start thinking about that?
Yeah, and this goes into like maybe diagnostic criteria, but always in the diagnosis you look at setting, and so in one setting or settings. And the other thing is duration of time. Is this going on for just 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, or is it pretty pervasive? And then the other aspect is how much is really interfering with their life. Is it only one aspect of their life or multiple aspects of their life? Do they have issues sleeping, eating, going to school, things like that? It's of course a gradation, but I would say, and I think for me it's hard to come up with really specifics other than going to a psychiatrist, a pediatrician. But kind of those 3 or 4 kind of dimensions is important for you to consider. If it's only one, then maybe your anxiety can be lessened with that. But if it's pervasive, then that's an important thing to consider and maybe start looking at with pediatricians or psychiatrists.
Yeah, I really want to emphasize what Sith was saying when saying it affecting a large part of their life, because I think a lot of, feelings of anxiety, feelings of sadness, loneliness, these are things that most of us have gone through in our lives. And it doesn't mean that someone has like a mental health diagnosis per se. And so when it comes to actual diagnosis of anxiety, depression, other things that we are more concerned about, you take a look at the basic things that Sith was mentioning. Are they not able to sleep at night because they're constantly lying in bed, thinking about just being fearful of the world, being fearful of being with friends, being fearful of their body, being fearful in public spaces? And that's causing them to just sleep very, very little. Or are they causing them to not eat as much? Are they losing weight? Is it causing them to not even want to go in school, not even want to be in public places anymore? How much is really impacting their day-to-day life? And that's for sure when we want to consider, okay, do we need further evaluation? Because, all of our kids will probably go through periods of feeling all those things to some degree, but if they're still able to function and do their daily tasks decently well, and okay, how do we open a line of communication so that if something really is wrong, that makes sure that that's communicated.
Sorry, one last thing. There's no such thing as good or bad emotions. All emotions are neutral and are extremely important to experience in life. And so sometimes when individuals may feel sad, certain cultures or families may think, oh no, something's bad, there's a disorder. This is not necessarily true. Sadness is a very important part of life. Anxiety is a very important part of life. These things have their utility. And so, that's another thing to also keep in mind.
That sounds great. Thank you so much. And I think we might have just maybe one or two more questions.
Yeah.
There is one question that I thought was I figured at some point we probably talk about, and that's the concept around addictive behaviors, especially amongst kids and adolescents, and engaging in things like substance use, things like gambling, things like video game addictions. I think a lot of parents can struggle with how to confront these things, and and I will say from my from my own experience and knowledge is that oftentimes video games are often used to be a replacement for some internal need that the kid or whoever it is has, like whether that's a need to feel in control of their life or a need for socialization. There's different avenues that video games can fulfill that they may not actually have in their actual life. So maybe rather focusing so much on the behavior itself, it's a better understanding what's causing that behavior. I wonder if you guys could also comment about that or have some additional input that you'd like to share about that.
Yeah, this is something, I mean, I'm focusing on kids right now. And this is a question that we get all the time, right? Because it's pervasive in our society right now. One, I don't want to say, one, it's important to not say video games are bad or social media is bad, right? These are all tools. So starting off from that kind of framework, when it gets out of control, it's when we need to address it. And so like Dr. Shu was saying, understanding the thoughts behind it and the reason why. A lot of times it is wanting to explore this new fantasy realm, right? At times it's to get rid of boredom. At times it is to socialize with friends, and oftentimes this is, right? Because most of their friends are on this, and so it's developing a sense of community. Now, how to address it? There's many different ways to address it, but I think one way that is important is one, to remember that you're the parent and that games are a privilege. So there is that right that you have of taking it away, but then how do you take that away, or how do you decrease it? It has to be step by step. You cannot go cold turkey, or else things will start to explode. And so maybe figuring out how much does my child play? And then how much is how much do I want to reduce it by? And so let's gradually go less and less, but at the same time, replacing it with something else. But I want to say that it's important to include your teen in this conversation. Make a plan together. Say, hey, this is what's going to happen, but I want to give you choices. Okay, let's figure out what the goal is, and then let's figure out what activity to supplement it with and how much we will decrease by. So make a reasonable plan together and stick to that. Maybe even write that out. It's really important to have these things be concrete.
Yeah, we've had a lot of teenagers come into our child clinics. Their parents would mention very similar things where maybe they'll come home, they'll play video games for hours, and then they won't even finish their homework. And so how do we balance, those types of wanting to socialize? And I think that's the really important thing, is that a lot of times they use this as a means of interacting with their friends. If they're not able to hang out with them as much outside, or during a COVID period when that was more limited, then a lot of their interactions with friends is online. And that interaction is important still. But then, of course, when we talked about in the presentation, like setting limits, how do we best do that? And so what Sith was talking about, of creating kind of a mutual understanding, a mutual goal between both parties, is really important. So what we do in the clinic is, okay, we mention it to the kid or mention it to the parent. We say that we recognize it. The kid a lot of times recognizes, like, yeah, I do play video games a long time, being very blunt, but I just don't want to do my homework. So then how do you form this mutual understanding of, okay, then what forward, and then what are you willing to give up? What are you willing to do? Are you willing to sacrifice? Maybe we can make a specific plan of, oh, these are the things we're going to do. You come home, do homework for 1 hour, then you get to play video games for 20 minutes or something. And then as long as the mom and the child are both willing and both take part in making this decision, a lot of times we see that they're actually able to incorporate that into their day-to-day lives. And that doesn't mean taking away what they might be, quote unquote, addicted to, or they really want to use, but it means still using it, but with certain boundaries in mind. So I think setting goals is like a really important thing.
Yeah, I think that's great. And also just to perhaps emphasize something you're saying is the importance of not only setting goals, but making the goals as concrete as possible. So like, instead of saying like, we're going to cut down our video game time this week, like we'll cut it from what to what, from 3 hours to 2.5 hours. Okay.
Exactly.
So making a very concrete goal and then writing it out, and then making sure that you're adhering to it and setting those boundaries. I think that's really that is really crucial to doing the behavioral therapy. Yes.
Yes.
But thank you. Linda, I don't know how much more time we have right now, or if we're about
we're about time. But thank you all so much for just an amazing discussion, as well as an amazing lecture. I know that there are more questions coming in, unfortunately, but I did want to share a little bit about UCA WAVES. So first of all, this is just our QR code to join the WeChat group for our WAVES Village, which is a parent support group. So in case you do have further questions, always feel free to ask them in this WeChat group. So I'm going to give people a little bit of time in case they want to join.
Linda, can I just mention one more thing?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, no, thank you all so much for having us on. It's been a pleasure for us to speak with y'all. I know there were a few questions we weren't able to get to, but also I think there was a question about book recommendations. We mentioned one book here in our presentation. So we have like a few books that some of our mentors or personally we've read before that kind of helps with like child development and parenting. If it's possible, maybe we can send it out to you, Linda, or someone else, and you guys can send it out to the listserv if that would be a helpful resource to some parents, so you guys can get the names.
Yeah, we can definitely send that out. Yeah, thank you so much. And I also wanted to share for other people, if they wanted to get plugged into our social media, we have Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, WeChat, email, and our website. So feel free to join any of these, or to follow us on any of these in case you want to get plugged into future webinars like this or other events that we host as well. Sorry, just catching up on the chat. Yes, the WeChat group is for parents only. But yeah, thank you so much, Patty and Sith, as well as Sen, for moderating the discussion. And you know, for what an amazing lecture. I mean, I'm not a parent, but I imagine that for all the parents who were here, I think that they found it very educational and informative. So if you don't mind, everyone, if you could all just give a round of virtual applause for Patty and Sith, that would be fantastic. And of course, if
Thank you all
anyone
so
has
much.
further questions, yeah, and if anyone has further questions or wants to hang out a little bit, you have all of our contact information for UCA WAVES. And I also just wanted to give a big shout out as well to Laura, Chengfu, and also Lily for being here and being the support team in the back who, oh yes, I can send the WeChat code again. But for being the big support team in the back, helping us manage the chat and make our webinar as successful as possible. So thank you all so much.
Yeah, so Linda, for anyone who's still hanging around, I would also like to introduce Crystal Len, who's the other coordinator of the WeChat support group. I just promoted Crystal to be a panelist. Let's see if that worked. If Crystal, hi Crystal. So Crystal is our very energetic coordinator of the WeChat support group. So
okay. Well, actually, I'm unable to start my video, but it's fine. Well, I'm not planning to.
Do you want to try
today.
one more time? Sorry,
Okay.
I just.
Yeah.
Yes, we see you now.
Okay. Well, hello everyone. First I want to thank you to Patty and Sith for your time and give us this wonderful educational informative webinar. We all benefit from the webinar, a lot to learn, and also thanks for everyone organizing this webinar. It's very helpful to everyone. Okay, quick introduction to the WAVES village. Currently we have 3 WeChat groups that to provide the peer support to our audience or WeChat group friends throughout the whole US and across from also Canada and also mainland China. People from the world benefit from our WeChat group peer support. And currently we have almost 40 volunteers to stand by and support this 3 groups. What we do is we spend our time if you have any question related with mental health or parenting or even yourself, you can chat in our 3 groups with your questions, concerns, and we have volunteers step by or when we have chance.
Yeah, thank you everyone for coming out and for all of you who helped organize. We're gonna end the webinar now, but definitely feel free to reach out or join our WAVES Village groups as Laura and Crystal were explaining.
Thanks everyone.
See you again
Thanks,
in the
Linda.
future. Yeah.
Bye-bye.